Screen sharing. Right. Can you see? So it's still on the first slide. I'm going to do it this way then. Right. Can you see the next slide? Think.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm going to do it this way. Thank you. It seems that I seem to have two different ways of sharing. Is everybody? Can everybody else see? I'm going to have a look at the chat. Right. Okay. This is interesting. So we have obviously certain energy forces at bay, which is fine. I welcome them. So as I stated about the her story, the guys, can you see the people who influence the information from a modern perspective? I'll say one thing, Wayne Chandler goes more into the history, and so does Matthias Di Stefano. Okay. So, and as I say, this information is obviously, you are listening to it from an intellectual perspective, but it is information which is actually, with time, becomes embodied, becomes part of you. And you experience it because you actually work these laws or become these laws from an emotional perspective and through your experience. Okay, I'll just carry on. Yeah. So her historical background, as I stated before, we've been around a long time, 20 million years. Go through, obviously I put a little bit of information here about the different types of humans because they are actually, it's quite pivotal. We're actually water mammals, would you believe, way back. And there are some myths and stories. You know, we hear about the dolphins, etc., and the whales. That is part of our dolphin, our aquatic ancestral heritage. And this was all around East Africa, and there's quite a lot of information there actually about that. And obviously we developed from that aquatic phase to being upright, walking ancestors. And what's quite interesting is you actually don't hear much about these two phases. But if you go to the British Museum, there's some little artifacts there of dolphins and things, especially from the African continent, which actually show that heritage. And then in Indonesia, this is where we stood up. And this I do, oh, my internet is going crazy again. Then coming back to where everyone says the cradle of Homo sapiens, i.e. modern human, is in Africa, 400,000 years ago. But also be aware of this. This is the information to be, I would say, to really focus on 75,000 years before present, before now. This is where we, I would say, developed into who we are. And this is where we developed, I would say, brain-wise, to be able to take into account certain ways of being, thinking primarily. And I would say as well, not as connected to our environment as we were prior to that time. And obviously, I note certain other developments of ourselves throughout the thousands of years, being aware of the Neanderthals dying out in 22,000 years BC. Why I note that is because this is where there was a group of humans who came from the flood time called the Solutians, and they were actually the precursors to a culture, the Atlantean culture, which has been around for around 75,000 years, because that culture was around at the same time as Lemuria, just after Lemuria, because Lemuria was first. So bringing this all right through, another major flood, the flood that we all know, the flood that's noted in, you know, if you are a Christian, the Bible, Noah, that's the flood. That was 15,000 years ago. That's the one that happened here. That's the flood that, as we all people may be aware of, that happened to wipe out, well, the started to unstable Atlantis, and eventually it was completely destroyed much later. But during this time, this is where, when the flood happened, this displaced us as humans, and we started to, I would say, travel around the world. We were traveling around the world anyway, around 75,000 years ago. That's why certain cultures seem to be quite similar in origin. And I keep going back to this because this is where the laws as we know it as we know them actually became dispersed to us as humans around that time. And I note Plato's here, because the Critias, which talks all about Atlantis and the flood around 15,000 years ago, and hints at the big flood around 75,000 years ago. So the Critias is noted by historians, not so much these days, as a myth, as a story. Stories and myths, this is where our information comes from. So, as I state, 75,000 years ago, the antediluvian world, the world before the flood, a lot of stuff happened. So this information about this time predates Noah, and it's noted in Genesis from a Western world perspective, and also through all the myths and stories and nursery rhymes from throughout the world. And the races that were around this time were perceived to be godlike, omnipotent. They could do amazing things, but they were human, mostly. And they lived according to the truths, which were perceived as principles. And the principle is a fundamental truth, which becomes a behavior and part of our reasoning. Today has become part of our reasoning. And truths, they are facts of the world. Facts that are our reality. A fact, a truth, a fact is, for example, you will die. No matter how you're going to look at it, you will die. It's a fact. It's a truth. And falsehoods are those notions or concepts or ideas which are generated from our reality. They're generated from our thoughts, our opinions, and our beliefs. So this is all about going back to the truth, the facts, not the opinions, beliefs, know-hows, the facts. So these guys lived according to truths, to principles. So we're going to go through a couple of these principles which underpin the laws. They became the universal laws. And I point out here, the Egyptian sage, as we people know him as Thoth, Tahuti, Hermes, Kemet, Trismegistus, all the same person. He lived a very long time. As I stated, these people who came from the floods around this time, who survived, who were with humans, they lived a long time. And he comes through our myths and stories, and also a little bit of evidence now in certain areas of the world. And he was the person to bring forth universal laws as we know them. And these were noted or written down in a particular perspective and known as the Hermetic laws. That's one aspect from a Greek perspective, because these laws popped up all over in different parts of the world and were noted in various areas. But I just refer to them as the Hermetic laws because of one of the more clearer references about them. But as I say, Thoth, whoever you want to call him or however you want to refer to him, Hermes, was one of the survivors of the flood. And these Hermetic teachings, as I state, came through various other areas in the world, and they're found within India and Persia, which is obviously known as Iran. And one of the guys who influences the information I'm presenting today is Muhammad Ali Tahiri, who is Iranian. And the universal laws I'll be referring to is actually from the works that he has unearthed. And this is quite an interesting point as well, is a lot of these teachings were actually lost, the Hermetic teachings. We've only got a few of them. One of them is the Hermetic laws. And there was only presented 7 of those laws, but there was a lot more. But a lot of this information got lost through the emerging theologies and philosophies of the time, as time carried on, because teachers who, over time, things get mixed up, who became pagan priests aspiring to power, amidst all the religions and superstitions and cults that were beginning to come through and are still here today. Basically, the information got muddied. So hopefully you still can see the slides, but if not, fine. So these principles, these laws, they are in two realms. What are they and how to apply them? There's two types. There's a type that have names and forms. They're all to do with our biological material world. They're all to do with our emotions and our relationships and our ideas. They are part of the space, time, and matter of who we are, the reality. And then there's a second type, which is completely out there, has absolutely nothing to do with space, time, and matter. No material base whatsoever, totally transcendent information. But they still move through our daily world and they go into the subtle realms. Some of them come through dreams. These laws cannot be intellectually learned. I've tried, you can't. Everyone's tried throughout the ages. They are somatic, but they can be integrated in your reality. Okay, and there's an aspect of these laws which actually are presented by Matthias de Stefano, and he broke them down into our 3D reality because we are 3D humans. And he split these laws up via the aspect of the chakras. I will state that there. It's very limited way of looking at the laws and actually experiencing them, to be limited in that way, because we are so much more than this system. And I just wanted to point that out. So what are they? So as a principle, the ones which are part of the space-time matter, i.e. biological material types, these principles are here. So these principles underpin the universal laws, and they are actually part of the laws. Gender, I'm not talking male, man, woman, we're talking male, female perspectives, be active, passive, causation, correspondence, rhythm, polarity. I'm not going to go through each one because of the time, but I just want to pinpoint more of, give you the flavor of what these laws are. Ones which are completely outside of time, space, and material world. These are the ones of vibration, your creative impulse, insight and illumination, communication and communion, being together. These are outside of the reality realm of which we are aware of. So the universal laws, currently there's 15, but there's a heck of a lot more. But what tends to happen is we are given what we need to know at this point in time. As we become, I would say, more aware, not going to use the word mindful, which I did, but aware, just noticing there's been more laws coming through. And as I noted before about the principles, these are how these principles fit into these laws. I'm not going to go through each one of them. In fact, I'm only going to go through one, the relativity law, because this one actually is one which most of us tend to be living amongst. But I actually do teach all these. I'm fully aware of them. And once you are fully aware of them, you are so fully aware of yourself and everything around you. So the principles, which I just noted, they sort of shoehorn into these laws. And what's quite interesting is how they further go into these laws. And I'll just show like an overview, is the Hermetic laws, which were brought through or made known through Trough, Hermes, Trismegistus, however you know him by. And he noted that there were 7. In fact, he knew there was more, but there's only 7 that's been brought through to our present day. But actually there are more. And the principles which I've outlined, they're actually outlined here as well. So this is quite nice, very quick summary, because books I've had to read is crazy. But mentalism is the first more law, I'd say, in which all is God. Starts from mind. Correspondence comes with planes of existence, i.e. being aware of your dimension and other dimensions. Vibration, this is where you start to manifest. Everyone talks about energy. This is where it comes from, utilizing that particular aspect of self. for manifestation. Rhythm, everything comes in cycle. And what was quite interesting, how this becomes more grounded in who and where we are, grounded within our social political selves, because humans do live within a social political continuum. That's how what we've constructed. So the rhythm is a law. If you're aware of rhythm, you know how to actually manipulate this social and political cycle. And I will say this to you who are on this call, that is what is happening now. There are persons who know this. If we know this, how empowered are you going to be? Cause and effect. We're all pretty aware of cause and effect from all the various traditions. There's a tradition that I'm fully aware of and actually was with for quite some time, and some of my colleagues are on this call, and I say hi to you all. The Four Noble Truths from the Buddha, he completely encapsulated the aspects of cause and effect, but it was just one of the laws. Polarity, duality. We live in a dual dimension, a dual universe. That's what we've constructed. That's the law that we work with. Gender. Gender is not about being male or female from a physiological perspective. It's about the passive and active mind and acting accordingly. So the Hermetic laws is the wonderful encapsulation of the universal laws, but it's not all of them, but it's one of the most well-known. Universal laws, which is coming through to us more so today through the New Age movement. What I highlight here are two aspects which just basically mishmash all the information from the Hermetic laws and from the 15 universal, which more so laws which are coming through. The mentalism here talks about all is one, but actually misses out quite a lot of information about the laws in general. And generation, which is about moving forward. It just limits them down to the aspects of the human energetic experience through these energy transforming areas, which are known as the chakras, which are attributed to, from a physiological perspective, our hormonal system. I didn't put down that information there. One thing I will say is, this is great, but it's limited, especially when you know there's 15 plus more laws going on. So this is a summary. I've just put them all out here, the 15 plus more laws. Whoa, this is the principles that seem to underpin them that we are aware of at this moment in time. And the 3D laws, which I've just mentioned, which are coming through, obviously from a New Age perspective with the chakras, etc., where these fit in, according to the laws, the universal laws per se, and the Hermetic laws, which we all sort of are aware of, or from a scholarly perspective. Yes, it's great, they fit. So one thing I will talk more on with regard to application is the relativity law, and just going across the board on how this relates to us, how it's, I would say, exercised in our lives and what we get from it. I'm not going to go through the rest because we'll be here for days and days, and I'd love to be here for days and days, but I don't think you will. You never know. But just look, going through more of these universal laws, there's no correlation, there's no further information, there's no principles, but there is information about these laws, laws we don't even know exist. And they do exist, and we actually do exercise them, but in a way that we don't know. If you know this information, you are able to live, as I say, more harmoniously, and this awareness is more apparent. Comes back again, there are some more of these laws, and this is where the rest of the known, so-called known information, principles, the 3D aspects of the laws and the Hermetic laws correlate to the actual universal laws themselves. Okay, so application, as I stated, look at the first top line, the first law out the 15. So if we look at it from a principle perspective, it takes into account the principle of gender and polarity. Gender is not apparent, does not exist within the current chakra type system law. It's not there. And I'm speculating here. I'm wondering Could that be why we have so much discord between ourselves as exercising our male and female aspects of ourselves? Something to ponder on. But what is gender? It's about duality, polarity. It actually brings that in from a positive and negative perspective, masculine, feminine, but here, not about the physiology, but about the will. So will in masculine perspective, determination, intuition, imagination from a feminine perspective. So the masculine perspective of ourselves is about stimulating, energizing, doing. Human doings, and that's what we all seem to be. But from a feminine perspective, we're human beings, just residing, growing, bringing things into fruition. We need both aspects. If we only have one, we become unstable. If we're just moving all the time, stimulating, growing, whoa, we end up making things sterile because we just end up using everything up, all the resources. Guess what's happening now? But if we just sit there and we don't grow, we just stagnate. And from here, I would sort of summarize is the masculine is all about, what do you believe? You would think it would be about action, but it's not. It's actually about being passive, because to be energized and stimulating, you're always moving away. It's quite interesting, actually. You're not growing. And the feminine, to be caring, to be nurturing, you have to be active to do that. You don't do it from a passive perspective. You have to be present. You have to be active. So the whole thing of embodying this gender principle is, once you are aware of it, you're able to resonate with balance with the earth. And we embody this whole principle through our feet and legs, would you believe, by being grounded. And you'd be surprised how many of us have issues with our legs. If you do, look at the aspects of whether you are moving forward or feel stagnant or holding back. Just look at that. It could be an aspect of your gender principle not being in balance. Polarity, another principle that you see through the relativity law, the first law. It's about nature, showing two aspects such as day and night, heat and cold. It's about the two opposite poles, this tension, this polarity causes a tension. We need this tension. We need this day and night, good and bad, this tension in our reality. You can't have one without the other, masculine, feminine. You just can't have one without the other. You can't even separate the two. You have to embrace it, and you embrace it as one. And once you embrace it as one, oh yeah, male, female, fine, one. This is what unity is all about. You can let go. That's liberation. So, as a universal law, the relativity law, it's really all about uncertainty. If there's anything you walk away with, just remember, the first law is about uncertainty. And I'm going to ask some questions, rhetorical questions, just to consider, to embody what this law is. Is an earthquake good? Is lightning bad? Are floods bad? It's all the stuff you hear on the news. Is it all bad? Is it harmful for humans to eat rat poison? Is Satan evil? These questions are relative, depend on the perspective, because nothing is absolute. Everything is presented as absolute, but it's not. And if you think that everything is absolute and this becomes part of your worldview, this is where you start to become unbalanced, because the world is that we've created, our reality is not like that. You have to be aware of the relativity of good and bad, of ownership, relativity of ugly and beautiful. So what is the relativity of good and bad? When I said before, is Satan evil? The last question I'm going to bring forward. Well, you would say, yeah, he is. Well, that actually is an absolutist point of view, because Satan is a symbol He's an angel of contradiction. He was the only one that did not bow down to man. All the rest did. All the rest went, oh, man, Homo sapien, great, we can work with this, we can bring things through, create, da, da, da. And Satan was like, nah, I'm not having that. I've got other fish to fry. I want to do my own stuff. I'm not bowing down to anybody. Fine. Created disorder because the angels created order. But if this was in the realm of where we live, this dimension, where we had to have this polarity, the principal polarity of order and disorder, brought through uncertainty. And this uncertainty is where you're really thinking about, well, so-and-so did this. There must have been a reason for it. This is the backstory. This makes you think about, there's a reason for it, the backstory. And this stops you from being absolutist about the aspect of good and bad, and gives forth to, again, a transcendent worldview. And this transcendent worldview is only gained after you pass through tests, and we've all passed a number of tests, and I know we're all still going through them. I know I am, where you are being tested upon the aspects of good and bad. Relativity of ownership, this law, how it hits this. Do we think that our hands, our eyes, our teeth, our hair, do they belong to you? Are they yours? No, because you can lose them at any point. You can lose a leg, you can lose an eye. I have my father, he's losing his sight, slowly but surely. And as it states here, so how long is this ownership valid? We own absolutely nothing. And the sooner we realize that, the better. Our ownership is only relative. And once we become aware of that, in that view, become more balanced. Don't become aware of it. This is where anxiety, stress, illness comes upon, because we are clinging. We start to cling on the aspects of clinging. My father, I can see my father now, clinging to having his eyesight. And I nurture him, and I talk to him, and I soothe him. And I use my healing arts on him, with his consent. And he's okay. All right. I get it. It's only for a time. It's all temporary. Because that's what it makes you realize, it's all temporary. And you harness the power to lose whatever you have. And it's the highest power a human can have. Because I love this. What is important is not what is lost, but how we view that loss. And relativity with regard to ugly and beautiful. The universe actually has no definition of what is ugly and what is beauty. That is a human concept. We say that's beautiful and that's ugly. I mean, a friend posted today a scarab beetle, which was not beautiful to look at all. But then again, I looked at it and it was. I was doing that, oh, it's not very beautiful. But then I thought, it is in its own right. We define as humans and interpret it within our continuum about ugliness and beautiness, ugliness and beauty. It's our perception. If we are so absolute that things are beautiful and things are ugly, we're always, I would say, anxious. It leads to illness. So just be relative about things. Just let things be. Right, so that's the relativity law, which underpins, I would say, the aspect of gender and polarity. And then there's this universal law, which has no apparent principle at all, the fountain law, the ones which hasn't really been written anywhere so much, apart from in Iran. And I wonder why Iran's under so much stress. So why I wanted to bring this one forward is because it's one that seems to be very apparent to us today. It's the law of summit and trough, distance and closeness, separation and unification. Basically, how I see this law is things come and things go. I see it as like a big wave. Sometimes we're up here and things are absolutely awesome, but we have the equivalent amount of, oh my God, things are so dire. And it's like this, it's this beautiful wave that we go through. That's the fountain law. It's like a fountain things are coming out. Everything approaches will eventually fall away. That means emotions, desires, your social position, your money, it'll all reach a summit and then it'll go down to a trough. But us as humans, we always want constant union. We always want it to be the same. No, it's always going to be like this. We always want to keep the wealth, the beauty, the boyfriend, the husband, the wife. But if you are aware of this law, you learn to the actual power to lose things, as was actually alluded to in the relativity law. You come to realize that there is no separation or union, that everything is one. And desire actually drops. Again, as I said at the right beginning, when you're aware of both, you go through the aspect of duality, and this is where unity and being aware of that becomes liberation. And when I was talking about before, about the limited laws which we are aware of, that's coming through a number of our New Age movements, mentalism generations, ones I'm going to talk about, because we are aware of them and I'm going to honor them, okay? Mentalism, one of the laws, it is the first law. Everything is mind. I think, therefore I am. That is the central tenet of that. If you can't remember anything, remember what Descartes said. That's not all. It's only a tiny bit. In fact, it's hardly anything. Because we are 3D. But these laws were presented from a 7D. D means dimensional perspective. We 3-dimensional, i.e. we have time, space, and matter. I think that's it, yeah. No, it's actually 4-dimension. It's like being in the box. Yeah, but we understand it. To understand it, these laws, it's been broken down into 7 through this energy system. But these laws, which came from a 7-dimensional perspective, which is actually being acknowledged, there's more dimensions. I think if anyone knows Brian Cox, he's actually, and a few others have noticed that there's quite a few dimensions. I think there are now 24. But a dimension to be aware of is the 6th dimension, the great void, dark matter, people call it. This is the ether. This is where things manifest, grow. This is where things come through. And it's the element where we understand from the aspect of virtue of how we behave to others. Would you believe it coalesces as that from a material perspective through mind? And one way of thinking about this law is what I think is actually outside of me. Whatever I think is what happens. So be careful what you think, because it'll be out there. And generation, which is the last one, the roots. I'm not going to go through them all, because to me, these laws are very limiting when there are so many. But this law helps you move through your path. The root, as you know, the root chakra, whatever, base, legs, they are there, limiting. And it's all about, what am I generating new from an emotional, mental, or physical perspective? What reality am I generating? It's over there. But be aware, there are far more laws. Do not limit yourself, if you can, to these. So again, this is just a summary of that. And as I would say, please find out more for yourself. These are aids to seeking. The books that some of the books, tip of the iceberg of the books that I have found and assimilated information, and actually I'm practicing the information. For example, I practice the metamorphic technique, which is about exercising the principles within the human, letting them experience and be these laws. The Human Worldview by Muhammad Ali Tahiri. This is part of the teachings that I do teach. And I've already shown you one law from the many laws, which is only a tip of the iceberg of the whole conscious information of us and of our environment in which we reside. Ancient Future, amazing book, goes through more of the history, prehistory, by Wayne Chandler. Very, very interesting. Talks a lot of it from, I would say, it is from a Black perspective, if you want to break things down into delineation, and also from a feminine perspective. But look at the book as a whole as information which you won't actually get from anywhere else, and marry it with all the other information you've got. And before Atlantis, whatever you say, it was here. And there is a lot of evidence for that. And this book actually brings that through. And also take a good look at some of your museums. British Museum, for definite, but also if you ever get to go to Berlin, if we're allowed to travel, the Pergamon Museum, there's a lot of information there. And also in Turkey. So thank you.